Welcome back to our class. This is week 7, lecture 2. We're going to cover one chapter, chapter 24 of the Grudius book, and so hopefully you'll have read that already, or watch the lecture and then read it. This is one of the easier chapters in the Grudius book because it's pretty much straightforward history and theology. It does not concern itself with a lot of complex issues, as we have seen with some of the chapters of our book, slipping over into a variety of different philosophical disciplines. So apologetics and the challenge of Islam. Now, let me remind you about the alternative to doing the frame review, which is watching God is Not Dead 2. In some ways, I think that might even be a better assignment. And as I believe I mentioned earlier in the week, it is a film that you ought to see since you're taking a course in apologetics and have entered into a program of apologetics. And I expect you to have both some positive analyses and negative. That's where I am. And specifically, when you get to sort of thinking about this critically, you might want to ask yourself the question, is this the kind of apologetics that ought to happen on a university campus or in general? And then secondly, is this the way you yourself would do apologetics? Now, if you need any help with further understanding of the argument, please, or the assignment, please feel free to email me, chadbrand@aol.com. All right, on to Islam. Islam is either the largest or near to the largest religious tradition in the world. Depending on what statistics you read, Christianity and Islam are both pretty close when it comes to just numerical adherence. Of course, many of us would recognize that within Christianity there are many nominal Christians. That is, people who go to church at least a few times a year, but don't really work out their faith in their personal life, their family life, their business life, or anything else. And so we might want to just chop that group off. Well, let me just say there are many Muslims like that as well. We normally hear about the terrorists, the ones who are looking for some eternal reward in heaven better than others have because they have bombed the World Trade Center, or they've killed some Belgian people waiting at an airport, or because they took Israeli athletes, kidnapped and killed some of them back in Munich in 1972, which was one of my first, if not my first, realization of the fact that there was this religion, Islam. I knew about it before then. 72 was the year I graduated from high school. But the first I'd really encountered the whole notion of jihad and terror. So it's important for us to know something about Islam. You're just about as likely to meet a Muslim person accidentally or on a plane or as a neighbor as you are to meet an atheist. So let's talk about it here. Good chapter, short chapter, easy to deal with the issues. First of all, he talks about Muslim theology here, beginning on page 601. He's going to go through what he considers, and I would agree with him, are the 6 key issues in Islamic doctrine and practice. The first, of course, is Allah, which is simply the Arabic word for God. We think of the cognate language of Israel, Hebrew, and the generic word there in the Old Testament is Elohim, Allah, Elohim. Linguistically, those two languages are in the same family, along with some of the Ethiopian languages and a number of others that sort of are geographically located from northeastern Africa right up into the Middle East. Different from the Indo-European languages, these are related to each other, and so sometimes you'll have this bleed over of words. So when a Muslim talks about Allah, they are simply and generically talking about God. Of course, we know that Muslim mantras about God are sometimes more insidious than that, more heinous than that. So Allahu Akbar is what is often cried out by Muslims before they engage in an act of terror. But just remember the word Allah. And even today in the Middle East, in Christian circles, and there are many Christians in the Middle East, not as many as there were 50 years ago, but there are Christians there in the Middle East, and their word for God in their language is Allah. Secondly, angels and demons. Angels and demons can be both assistants and they can be mischievous little squirts at the same time. But there's an elaborate angelology and demonology worked out in Islam, even more elaborately than we would find in the pages of the New Testament. Various different categories, archangels, then high angels, then angels. There's spirits, as the author points out, known as the jinn, J-I-N-N, or D-J-I-N-N. And of course, those came down to us literally as the genie in the bottle. So all that's connected here. Thirdly, the prophets. And he gives a list of the prophets. Adam, page 602. Moses, David, John the Baptist, Jesus, Muhammad was a prophet. And some Muslims are looking forward to a final imam or a final prophet who will come to usher in the end of the ages. Specifically, Shiite Muslims are anticipating that. Number four, the holy books. Of course, the Quran is the key of the holy books, but they also hold to certain passages of the Bible as being holy books. Here's another case where we have bleed over from the biblical tradition to the Islamic tradition. Understandably, these people were cheek by jowl with each other for so many centuries, and you can see why there would be bleed over. Muhammad himself, who died in 632 AD, was a person who was very familiar with Christians as well as Jews, and that's largely because in his first 25 years of life, he worked as a caravan merchant under his uncle Abu Talib. So, holy books, mostly the Quran, and there's even a group of books called the Hadith, which is sermons from Muhammad. Number 5 here is the judgment of God. There's a very harsh doctrine of judgment in the Quran, and God is considered to be holy and transcendent, and so he must be obeyed perfectly. This is something that you find with Unitarian type religions of all kind. Jehovah's Witnesses, the Baha'i faith, Islam, some forms of Judaism, especially New Testament Phariseeism. And the idea there is that since God is the creator and the lawgiver, you have to obey him. And of course, we all have failed. And so Muslims don't really have a trinity. They don't have a trinity at all, where the Son of God lived a perfect life and died a substitutionary death. So they're kind of stuck in that. Many fear judgment. And then 6, divine decree and predestination. Very strong doctrine of predestination. There's a place in the Quran where it says there's not an atom in the universe that God does not push by his own finger. There's no real concept of secondary cause in Islam. It's all primary cause, and it's all done by Allah. So Allah be praised. Something good happens, inshallah. God be praised. If something terrible happens, inshallah, it's the will of God. If a person is a beggar, inshallah, he or she was destined to be a beggar, and so on. Now, 604, there's a section on Islam and Christianity. You'll find several points he makes here that show the real differences between Islam and Christianity. So claim 2, for instance, so on page 606, Jesus was not crucified. That's part of their belief. 607, claim 3, Jesus is not divine. 608, claim 4, God is not triune. Claim 5, Jesus was a prophet of Islam, but that's all. Now, he does have eschatological significance. They believe at the end of all things that Jesus will reappear. Not in the way you and I have been taught to think it from biblical New Testament texts, but nonetheless, that's their belief system. He talks about human Islam. He talks about Islam and the human condition, and makes several points here. One is that the human condition is not that of mere weakness and ignorance, but of radical depravity and corruption. So this concept of depravity is very strong in Islam, in some ways more insidious than any other religion. 6:12, secondly, Christian faith offers confidence that humans are loved by God, given the work of Christ on our behalf. But in Islam, it's all salvation by works. Then he talks about how Christians oftentimes feel and speak of their relativity with God, and rightly so. There are 5 Muslim pillars. These are things that Muslims must practice, and that's an important aspect of the Islamic practice of tradition. Pray toward Mecca every day, go on a pilgrimage to Mecca, a Hajj, at some time in your life, if you're able to. Repeat the Islamic creed. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. Those are all parts of the pillars of Islam, and he does a good job here, I think, of treating in a fairly simple fashion these religious issues. Talks about Christianity, undefeated by Islam, and you might think that in light of everything else, that Islam would have won that part of the world exclusively, but it is not. All right, in the next lecture, we're going to look back at our Oliphant book.